A celebration of the blood-soaked peace they say they've returned to the nation. It was on these streets of Kandahar that the Taliban first emerged in the 1990s. Now, 2 years after returning to power, there is no joy in the eyes of the men lining these flag-draped roads, and of the women, there are none. August 2021, and images to haunt the players in that drama still, of people so desperate they clung to the underbellies of planes abandoning their nation. Few in that moment were more at risk than the brave female politicians who had risen and raised up the lives of every other Afghan woman too. Like Women's Minister Hasina Safi, who hoped, even when the Taliban stormed her ministry, that they were capable of the change they promised.
I had a hope. And I was saying they have changed. As a woman minister, they may approach me. They may come to me. They may ask for my advice. What should we do?
When did you lose that hope?
I think it was 19th or 20th of August, when my security team informed me that one of the groups have decided for your assassination as a role model at the top level so that there is fear at the bottom and women themselves isolate them. And that was the time that I decided that it was a matter of life and death.
Thousands descended on Kabul airport in those frantic days. A history of working with foreign forces or the fledgling government which had just fallen meant you should be in fear for your life. Hasina, her husband, son and 2 daughters joined the huddled masses and were plucked from the crowd by a US soldier called Jesse, who took personal charge of getting them to safety.
He took the email inside the space and he came back very happily and he waved at us. And Jesse was so happy, he came, come. They said she can come. And then they brought a bus and we entered the bus when the door of the bus was closed. So the soldier told me, Madam, you are in safe hands. That was the time that I thought about all those people who were outside the airport. They were waiting for such a moment. Everyone deserves to live.
The government say almost 25,000 Afghans have been resettled in the UK. Today, some of them gathered outside Parliament to remind politicians there are thousands more still trying to get out here. Some of them dying along the way, like 6 Afghans who died in the Channel at the weekend. There are varied schemes and subsets of schemes to resettle Afghans here. The numbers on some of them are desperately low, say campaigners.
Look, only 40 people have come through the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. It's an absolute disgrace. That scheme was supposed to be a safe and legal route for people to get here. It's not working. Why have only 40 people been resettled here? You know, it's 2 years have gone. It's because people have to leave the country, then they have to, if they get to a neighbouring country, make an international phone call, find a lawyer to do that. It's impossible to do that.
The government say they've helped more than 9,000 Afghans on other veins of the Citizen Resettlement Scheme. For Hasina, here's fine, but it's home she dreams of.
One of the things which have kept me living in the last 2 years, I'm still thinking about development of my country.
And could you see a time returning to Afghanistan where even in some capacity the Taliban were in some sort of control, there was some sort of power sharing with the Taliban?
In condition. As a woman, I have to be respected. As a woman, I have to be heard.
But do you think the Taliban would ever give you that?
If they are wise, they will give it to me. Otherwise, they will lose.
But wisdom is often the rarest of commodities.
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, our foreign affairs correspondent Sikandar Kamani is with you now. Sikandar, you spent a lot of time in Afghanistan before the Taliban came to power, while they were in power. You were there 2 years ago, of course, when the Americans and the Brits left. How would you sum up the experience there of the last 2 years?
Well, look, Matt, when the Taliban took power, they didn't have the support of the majority of the Afghan population. But what they had, at the very least, was the acquiescence of very significant segments of it. Afghans who were tired of war, who wanted an end to conflict, who, some of whom also resented government forces, who were also accused of very serious human rights abuses. But over the past 2 years, I think the Taliban have really squandered the goodwill that some Afghans had towards them. Initially, they adopted a more pragmatic attitude to governance than many had feared, but they've become increasingly hard line. We've seen now, for example, anyone who's deemed a critic of the Taliban is liable to be detained, tortured. One prominent education activist, Matiullah Wessa, he's now spent months in jail. Today, Angelina Jolie wrote a letter in support of him. Women's rights, of course, most severely impacted, not able to work in many jobs, ordered to wear the face veil in public, and prevented from getting an education beyond primary school. And it's on that issue of education, female education, you see the starkest divide, really.
And they promised a lot, didn't they, at the beginning, or quite a bit, and they seem to renege on those promises. What is the overall humanitarian situation now?
Well, look, on the humanitarian situation, Afghanistan has long been a very poor country. The Taliban can look to point out successes they've had in raising revenues from customs. The previous government was very corrupt. The Taliban don't have that kind of problem. And so they've actually done what many analysts say is quite an impressive job. But many Afghans are still dependent on humanitarian aid to avoid going hungry. Real concerns that partly because of those human rights abuses by the Taliban, that not enough of that humanitarian aid is being donated. And
just in 10 seconds, in terms of the situation of women, girls and women at school or university, what can they do and what can't they do?
Well, look, one of the key things, as I was saying, is this issue of female education. And I was in Helmand province, a bastion of Taliban support, around this time last year, speaking to a group of young men. And I said, what do you want your daughters to do? Do you want them to go to school or not? They said, forget school. We want them to go to university. And that really shows the gulf between the aging, ultra-conservative Taliban leadership and the modern Afghan society, even in areas that are considered their strongholds.
Sikandar, thanks very much indeed.